Hey guys, Shane here, so welcome to part 2 of my Jumbo 76 build. In this episode we're going to be taking a look at painting and doing some basic detail work on our M4 Jumbo here. So I pre-primed our model with some auto rattle can primer, and it has been allowed to cure for 24 hours before we start applying our pre-shade of, in this case, Model Air German Grey. So I'm just going to start gradually building up this shadow layer here, just like focusing into areas I would imagine a shadow would gather on the tank itself, or areas I just want to kind of denote that there's different plates or different details in place here. So the pre-shade layer is both an insurance policy and a way of adding depth to our preceding, or should I say, the layer of olive drab we're going to add on top of this. Because there's a lot of nooks and crannies on this jumbo as well as some resin parts, I don't want any of the grey primer to show through any gaps or any cracks in the model, if you like. So that's one of the reasons why I lay down a primer coat, or should I say a pre-shade coat, just to ensure that I cover any areas that might show through the olive drab, as well as adding artificial shadow to the model. So with our pre-shade allowed to dry, now I'm going to start adding our olive drab layer, and for this we're going to use Vallejo model colour Dark US Green. Now I've thinned this down with a little few drops of airbrush flow improver. And I'm going to try my best to keep as much of the pre-shaded area in place. Unfortunately it's not going to work out on this build, not because of the technique or with the paint. Unfortunately the weather here has been so damp here in Ireland that my paint is so thin, especially the olive drab layer, it is literally running off my tank. So in order to correct it I have to keep building up layers to the point I almost lose the pre-shade. However, if you're in a better environment or not working in your shed like I am, this should not be a problem. And again, by keeping our paint relatively thin, I just put a few drops of flow improver into this like I mentioned. It just allows to make our paint ever so translucent, so we can kind of control the light and shade values that are coming through this monotone colour. Now we're going to be adding our own highlights on top of this again, as well as oil filters that we'll cover in this video as well. So we're going to be doing quite a bit to try to break up monotony that is olive drab. So with our base layer allowed to dry, now we'll start adding our highlight. So I'm just going to take our US dark green and then add some Vallejo model color yellow ochre to it. Just a few drops, nothing too crazy. You can regulate how light you want to go. I always kind of find it's better just to put maybe 30% of the lighter color to 70% of the darker as your starting point, and then give or take as you wish. And I'm just going to start focusing this on the tops of details or any area I want to pop out. I can also kind of do some type of paint streaking effects by just doing vertical lines with my airbrush, as you can see here. I'm using a Hartern Steenbeck Evolution with a 0.2 needle on it, so it has a very fine needle, allows you to do some very fine needle lines or pencil lines, if you will. Now I've been quite disciplined with this lighter colour. I don't want to make it too light because olive drab is a very dark colour. However, I tend to kind of go a couple of shades brighter or a couple of hues brighter than it should be, just because I don't want to make it too dark because then it's just too boring, you can't see any detail on it. So you can see I'm just slowly picking out panels and I'm just adding some of the lighter colour into the centre of these panels. So it is a form of modulation, it's the more old school version of it, where you're not really using hard edges, you're just lightening the centre of panels. So I'm just going to start masking off our olive drab here, just with a little bit of Tamiya tape, and then we're going to start applying our greys to build up a concrete effect. So I'm going to be using several model air grey colours, and I'm just going to keep mixing them together in different ratios to create different effects. But I'm going to do several layers of mottled colour, and what I mean by that is I have a darker layer here and I'm going to start mottling light grey, as you can see me here doing. But I'm going to keep the light grey the consistent colour. So you can see it's just a very basic concrete effect, and now we're going to start adding some rust effects to the I-beam that was basically welded onto the side or to the bottom of the tank to act as the support for the concrete armour. So I'm just going to give it a layer of Vallejo Model Air Burnt Umber. You can use Model Air colours with a paintbrush, they brush very nicely, you don't have to thin them out in any way. And I'm just going to use this Burnt Umber as our base colour to kind of create a somewhat rusty or oxidised I-beam effect. Now I'm going to take some model colour red leather. I've thinned it down ever so slightly, and I'm just going to start doing small stipple and dabbing motions just to build up this kind of more brighter rusty colour. I don't want it to be too bright, and I don't want to lose the burnt umber underneath it. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to water this down quite substantially. It's probably watered down maybe 20% paint to 80% water. And then you can see me, I'm going to start dabbing this in, I'm going to stipple it on, blending it out to create like a slight texture. If you ever look at rust, it actually has texture in real life. So by doing this small stippling motion, you will create a very subtle, or at least the illusion of a texture. The newer the rust, often the brighter it is, so keep that in mind. Now I don't want to go completely crazy with this colour, I want to keep it somewhat muted, but I'm just going to slowly build this up. I'm also going to start adding really watered down layers of model layer light rust. This is a very orangey rusty colour, and I'm just going to pool it into some very small areas and then blend it back. I'm going to be very careful with this colour. I don't want too much of it. I just want to kind of show little bits of rust built up, maybe from water seeping in or gathering at the I-beam before it was repurposed for the tank armour. So with our basic olive drab layer allowed to dry, we're going to add a layer of gloss varnish in preparation for the oil filters we're going to add to our M4 Sherman. You can see that I've lost most of my pre-shade because, as I mentioned before, it's been so damp here in Ireland that any light colour of paint I have immediately takes on all the moisture and runs off the model. So I had to come in with consecutive, heavier coats of paint and totally undid my pre-shade. And I didn't want to add a post-shade. I don't like doing post-shades on my Shermans or any of my armour. So we're going to have to come in with our oils to re-establish that shade and that nice colour transition. And now we're going to move on to our oil filter. So we're going to be using some oils from 502 Octilon. And I'm just going to use some plastic shot glasses here to mix up some of the colours. And I'm literally going to add a tiny amount of oil paint to about 90% white spirit thinner. Now, I am well aware that plastic and white spirits do not mix, so white spirit will melt and eat through plastic. However, for the space of just an hour that I was doing this, you're perfectly fine. But don't leave a plastic cup full of white spirit on your table. Leave it for the night, because if you come back the next morning, your workspace will be destroyed. So ensure that you properly and responsibly dispose of your white spirit and these cups after use. So what I'm going for here is I'm just going to create tints. So just the slightest hint of these colours. So just a small amount of oil. In some cases I've added a little bit too much oil, and I'm going to add about maybe 85 to 90% thinner. So I just want to make a very, very subtle tint, and in the next couple of steps we're going to start picking out various panels upon our M4 to add a little bit of subtle variation from one panel to the next. So we're going to begin by adding our filter. In this case, I'm just going to take some magenta. I'm going to remove most of the tint onto a piece of paper and then slowly just build up this colour, but just a tiny amount at a time, onto the turret roof. I'm going to take a different colour. In this case, I'm going to take some of the dark blue that I've mixed up and turned into a tint, and I'm going to paint it onto the mantlet. And so for each plate that's a separate plate, I'm going to pick a different colour. So again, I'm going back to the magenta here for the side of the hull, at least on one side, and then on the other side I'll use a different colour. And for each discernible panel that has a line of demarcation, if you like, I will pick a different colour. So with our oil filter allowed to dry, we're going to start working on adding the detail work on our Sherman. So we're going to start off with the stowage. I often find that the stowage is very important to any armour model, so I do try to dedicate as much time into painting the stowage as I do to adding any other detail to the model. So I'm going to really just pick various different drabs and beige colours. I don't want anything too bright. So that's going to come in with our Russian uniform, and then start painting some of these other larger tarps and blankets. This is a slightly lighter colour than the field grey, so it does help break up things without making it look unmilitary, you know. The thing to bear in mind is you really do not want to make your stowage on your armour look overly bright unless it's maybe a civilian item that perhaps the crew've taken from a destroyed building or bought off the locals. Then you can use justifiable colour, if you like, to try to break things up. And what I mean by that is it makes sense why that blanket or that bucket or teapot or whatever the hell it might be is brighter than everything else. Because bear in mind, all this stuff is military issue, so it's all going to be drabs and kind of dark greens and beigey colours. So it's just kind of, it's a way of breaking up the model. It's still going to be a lighter shade than the actual olive drab is, but we still want to make it look like it belongs on the tank. You know, we don't want to create an eyesore that will detract from your model. You want something that will complement and work with the overall look and feel of the vehicle you're trying to create. As you can see, by doing each blanket and each tarp one at a time, you can kind of decide which colour you want to put in. So I've gone back to our German camo beige here just to add it in, because I thought it would work a bit better than just using the green, because I don't want to use just too much of the same colours in sequence, just to help break things up ever so slightly while still having them all work well together. So with our base coat's allowed to dry, we're going to use my tried and tested Agrad's Earthshade. Again, this is a Citadel or Games Workshop acrylic wash. I tend not to use acrylic washes in anything other than using like uniform or fabric. I won't use acrylic washes for weathering tanks, but for figures and any other kind of fabric type of equipment, I think it works very well. So I'm just going to lay this down somewhat heavy, but I'm going to try to be as even and neat with it as I can. I'm not going to let it pool anywhere I don't want, otherwise it'll just create some very nasty tide marks. So while I'm waiting for the wash to dry, I'm just going to take some German camo black brown and just paint in the spare tracks here on the rear racks here. I'm also going to take our German black brown here and paint in some of the metal parts for the tools. I find this is actually a really nice colour for creating like metal parts without using maybe a dark grey or an actual metallic colour. Now you can see that I've actually scratch built the retaining straps for the tools, and I'll actually cover that in another video on how I made them. It was my first time scratch building them, so once I'm a bit more comfortable with them, I'll make a video on how I made them. They were actually surprisingly easy. They're just strips of tammy tape and some homemade buckles I made from copper wire. So I'm going to take some German camo beige and start to very carefully paint in these retaining straps. So to paint in the wooden fixtures, I'm just going to use some Panzer Ace's new wood. Now you can leave these olive drab if you want. Most tank crews oversprayed their tools, or the factories did it. So this is really up to you if you want to actually add the wood effects or not, or even use hairspray methods to have the wood chipping through the oversprayed olive drab. I tend to actually paint mine in as just a bare wood, just as a way to break up the monotony of the olive drab, just to add a bit of visual interest. Now that our wash on our stowage has been allowed to dry, I'm just going to come back to the original base colours and just add a very basic highlight. Now you'll notice that I'm stippling the highlight onto the blankets and tarps, and the reason for that is I want to create an ever so subtle texture just to kind of give the impression of blankets, and also a lot of these are going to be woolen canvas, so they will actually have a texture on them. So once that's all been allowed to dry, we have our basic Sherman painted and ready for weathering. I did add the decals off camera, however I have a full video on how I do my decals or decals, and I'll put a link to that in the video description. So I really hope you enjoyed this, guys. Do catch me in part 3 when we start doing our oil and mud effects to bring this Sherman to life. I've been Shane, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye.